Today at the National Press Club, biomedical engineer Dr Daniel Timms. He was this year recognised as the Australian Society for Medical Research's medalist for inventing the world's first durable total artificial heart after his father died of heart failure. Dr Daniel Timms with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. My name is Corey McLeod. I'm a director of the National Press Club and the publisher of InnovationAus.com, an independent publication reporting on the Australian tech and innovation sector. Our speaker today is Dr Daniel Timms. Dr Timms invented the world's first durable total artificial heart, the Biomedical titanium heart, which is currently being tested for trials in patients. Daniel's innovation or invention is seen as the basis for a future artificial heart design and a viable alternative to heart transplants. His story is one of ambition and ingenuity, a relentless pursuit to build a device that could improve and indeed save the lives of millions of people living with heart failure. It's also a deeply personal story. When Daniel's father died of heart failure when he was a PhD student, he became laser focused on developing a solution to assist people just like his father. 2 decades on from working on the artificial heart as a PhD student at the Queensland University of Technology, Daniel is now the Chief Technology Officer of his company, Biomedical. In a huge milestone for Daniel and his team, this year, a man in his 40s from New South Wales became the first patient in the world to be discharged from hospital with the Biomedical total artificial heart. This is a brilliant story, and some of the media reporting paints this picture. Here's a few standouts. The Bunnings trips that helped an Aussie engineer create the world's first artificial heart. Dr Daniel Timms is a medtech heartthrob, having designed a device to totally replace the heart. And then finally, and I love this, a quote from Billy Cohn, Biomedical's Chief Medical Officer: "This thing will pump until the Earth spirals into the sun." Please join me in welcoming Dr Daniel Timms. Welcome.
Well, it has been a long journey, so the heartthrob might have been a couple of years ago, but we'll see from here. But it's an incredible honour to be here at the Press Club and stand before you here all now. And essentially everyone here is representing the voices that shape our national conversation. And today I want to talk about an issue that's quite literally a matter of life and death: the future of Australian medical technology. So we often celebrate our world-class doctors and nurses, but we also must talk about the life-sustaining technology that supports them. Class 3 medical devices is one. These are the pacemakers, the cochlear implants, and now the total artificial hearts. They're the most complex, high-risk, and resource-intensive medical devices that exist on the planet. So my core message is that Australia has an abundance of scientific genius, but we often fail to support at the most critical stage, sometimes reluctantly forcing our innovations to leave our shores to succeed globally. We must fundamentally reassess how we fund this sector, seeing government-supported funding not only as an expenditure at all, but a critical investment in our national future, which then powers our global success. But I want to start with something more fundamental. I want to start with my dad. My father, Gary, was a plumber, brilliant tradesman, and he had an incredible intuitive grasp of fluid dynamics, how water moves, how pressure works, and how systems connect. Often building ponds and waterfalls in the backyard as we're growing up. Unfortunately, however, while I was at university studying mechanical engineering, learning the theory of fluid dynamics from textbooks, my father was diagnosed with heart failure. Suddenly, the complex equations that were on my page and the tragic, simple reality of his failing pump collided. I watched as some of the best doctors in the world at the Prince Charles Hospital, with all their knowledge and compassion, ultimately telling him they were running out of options. The plumbing in his chest was failing, and unlike a broken pipe, you can't just swap it out. So the heart is an engine. It's just a pump. And for an engineer, a failing pump is a problem to be solved. But for a son, it's a call to action. That call to action has been my life's work. And it's a call that echoes across our nation. Heart disease is a leading cause of death globally, even more than cancer. And here in Australia right now, over 150,000 people are living with heart failure. No doubt most of the people in the room here today and watching from home have had some exposure to heart failure. A close family member, a friend, a co-worker. Heart failure has no bounds. But for most severe cases, the gold standard, the only proper solution, is a miracle, a human heart transplant. But this miracle is rare. The extraordinary generosity of donor families enables us to perform a tick over 100 transplants in Australia each year. But 100 transplants for 150,000 patients, the math is brutal. The gap is vast, but my father's story is not unique. It's a story of thousands of Australian families. And take a moment to think about the impact heart failure has on the patient's extended family. A father, mother, brother, sister, son, or daughter taken away from their family, often at times before their time. And it was the case for my father, who succumbed to his illness almost 20 years ago. For all that time, my mother's had no husband, my brother and I had no dad. And for what? Just because the pump in his body, the pushes of blood around, failed. Surely we can do something about that. But how do we bridge the gap between the number of donor organs and the patients with advanced heart failure? How do we offer hope to the thousands who will never get that call? Well, we build a new solution. And it's not like Australians to back away from a challenge like that. So the dream of a total artificial heart isn't new. It's a grail quest that's captivated engineers, surgeons, and clinicians for over half a century. In fact, there was somewhat of a race in the USA in the 1960s between developing an artificial heart and going to the moon. It turns out the first artificial heart was implanted before Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon, but it wasn't without its challenges. Although there was a significant milestone in medicine, the outcome wasn't widely considered a success. The device would break up the blood, was prone to blood clots, and after the few days with the support, the patient was transplanted, but then succumbed to an infection a few days after that. It seemed that developing an artificial heart was much harder than anyone had anticipated. But the reason for failure, they were built logically to copy nature. Similar to how first attempts at flight, mimicking the way the birds flap their wings and attaching them to arms, wasn't going to work. Hence, they were large. These artificial hearts were large, pulsing pumps with flexible membranes and mechanical valves that went click, clack, trying to mimic the lub-dub of the heart. But these early devices were beset by fundamental historical challenges. First and foremost and fundamentally, durability. Your heart beats 40 million times a year. It pumps a swimming pool of blood every single day. Any component, a membrane, a valve, a hinge, that flexes 40 million times a year is going to wear out. And for a device meant to keep you alive, wearing out is not an option. The second is the size. Most of these older designs were simply too large for many women and children. And third, the blood trauma. The moving parts, the flexible surfaces, they cause damage to those fragile blood cells, leading to clots and other complications. Therefore, these versions of a total artificial heart are only suitable as a temporary measure to keep a patient alive until a compatible donor becomes available. However, that simply just increases the number of donors competing for that limited supply of hearts. It isn't a true solution to address the critical shortage. This challenge led to a technological shift over the years. Instead of mimicking the pulsing mechanism of a native heart, innovators focused on the flow mechanism by rapidly spinning discs to move the blood and propel it continuously, similar to how fixed-wing airplanes with jet engines solved the challenge of heavier-than-air flight. This led to the development of VADs, or ventricular assist devices. Many of you may know them as LVADs. In fact, one very successful LVAD was developed in Australia in the early 2000s, the ventricle ventrassist. And that was implanted in more than 400 patients worldwide. And these devices are remarkable These remarkable devices use a single rapidly spinning disc to propel the blood around the body. They don't pulse, they provide continuous flow, like what comes out of your garden hose. These devices have been revolutionary, actually, in saving over 80,000 patients worldwide. But they were designed to assist a failing heart, not replace it. They typically support only one side of the heart, the left side. But what happens if the entire heart fails? What if you need a full replacement? We were still stuck. The durability problem with the old pulsing style heart seemed unsolvable, and the new continuous flow devices did only half the job. We needed a new idea. So this is where my engineering background and my father's plumbing intuition came together almost 25 years ago in a backyard in Brisbane. As a PhD student with a wounded tradie by my side, we decided to explore a new idea for an artificial heart. What could be so difficult? It's just a pump for another system, right? It was that kind of naive stubbornness that set the stage for the relentless decades-long pursuit of medicine's holy grail. Hopefully there's a chance that may have been able to save him if we were fast enough. It started out in our garage, which would often spill over into the kitchen deep into the night. We would take multiple trips to Bunnings to build a network of pipes that would approximate the human body to test out our new ideas and pump prototypes. Just another system, right? We could figure out the blood pumping part later. The biggest problem with previous total artificial hearts was mechanical wear, the durability. The solution? What if we can make a pump with just one moving part? And that part didn't touch anything. No friction, no mechanical wear. And that's the central idea for Biomedical. So we designed a total artificial heart, this is here in my hand here, that is built around a single spinning disc. It uses a rotary pump, similar to a pool pump or a spinning rotor in an outboard motor. Here's the disc here. But crucially, that disc is levitated, floating in the blood by a precisely controlled magnetic field. And we use maglev technology, the same principle in high-speed trains. There's no bearings, there's no seals, there's no valves, there's no mechanical contact with the casing, there's no mechanical wear, there's no way for it to stop. But unlike the heart assist devices that only support one side of the heart, this single rotor has two sides, each with a different blade design. The left side pumps the blood to the entire body, while the right side pumps the blood simultaneously to the lung. It's two pumps in one, working in perfect balance. So this rotor is housed inside a small titanium-built biventricular rotary pump. This is it here. It connects to the body through these somewhat flexible connections to the soft tissue to connect the hard titanium. Because it eliminates friction, it also reduces blood trauma and enables a device we expect to last for 10 years or more, similar to heart transplantation. This feature is essential to its potential long-term as a destination therapy, not just a temporary bridge to transplant. And because it's so simple in its concept, it's relatively small. It's compact enough to fit in a wider range of patients, including many women and children, as well as usually smaller Asian population, who are often too small for those larger, older devices. The TH is connected via a wire that exits the skin to a small control box with a battery pack, and that powers the pump. And with further development, this box can be made smaller, and ultimately electronics miniaturized and implanted inside the body, and power transferred across the skin to charge the total heart, much like you charge your iPhone or Samsung via inductive coupling. It's at this stage that we may have achieved our ultimate goal, to make a device that is as good as a transplant, or perhaps better. But how could it be better than a transplant? But although heart transplantation is considered a gold standard, it's not without complications. The aggressive immunosuppression drugs are toxic to the body. Too much, and the body may succumb to cancer or infection, while too little, and the heart will reject that foreign organ. This is the how and the what, but the why remains the same. Unfortunately, time ran out for my father. But it's still there for the 150,000 Australians and many more patients and their families worldwide, who'd wish to have their loved one around for another 5, 10, or who knows, maybe 20 years. An idea like this is one thing, though, but turning it into reality is quite another. The journey has taken 25 years, and the most important lesson I've learned is this: you can't solve a problem this big on your own. Groundbreaking innovations for Class 3 medical devices, the highest risk, most complex technologies, is simply too big, too expensive, and too complicated for one person, one company, or one country. You have to build a local and global dream team of expertise. Our journey is proof of that. Early on, we formed a collaboration between QUT and Prince Charles Hospital to develop the initial concept, test it in circulation loops, and ultimately support sheep having the device externally connected. Incidentally, this was around the time that my dad Gary's health began to decline, and he was being treated in the ICU by the very same doctors at the Prince Charles Hospital who we were collaborating with in the lab, located just 5 minutes away. We perfected the magnetic levitation technology with experts in Ibaraki University in Japan. Why spend 20 years trying to learn maglev technology when they'd already done that? We created early prototypes with the brilliant engineers at the Helmholtz Institute in Germany, in Aachen, and the institute was internationally renowned for developing blood pumps and bringing them to clinic for 3 decades. We collaborated with NASA on the principles of aerospace-grade system components and redundancy that they used in the shuttle program, and applied them to the design of the external control box that drives the artificial heart. What's the point of a mechanical durable pump if the electronics fail? And ultimately, armed with the Queensland Government Smart State International Award in 2013, we found a way to advance to a preclinical and clinical trials by partnering with the renowned Texas Heart Institute in the United States. It's the same institute that implanted the first total heart in a patient in 1969, I mentioned earlier. Dr. Cooley was still active then, along with his protege, Dr. Fraser, who was a medical student at the time of that implant and went on to perform the most heart transplants and blood pump implantations than any other surgeon in the world, over 1,000. And Dr. Cohen, representing the next generation of surgeons at the prestigious Heart Failure Hospital in Texas. So they'd been trying to improve on their initial total heart idea for 5 decades, ultimately realizing the potential of rotary blood pumps for total heart applications by using 2 of those LVADs to replace the heart completely. And they ultimately implanted that configuration in a patient in 2011. However, once they saw the Biomedical concept where those 2 pumps were combined into one dedicated system, they immediately shifted their support to our idea. They solicited funding from a local furniture salesman, affectionately known as Mattress Mac, who, like a lot of us, also had a personal connection to heart failure after his brother's death. He needed a Biomedical. This propelled him to whip out his checkbook and write a check for $2 million pretty much on the spot. And that enabled our worldwide team that we collected to travel to Houston and undertake another ambitious project. This is the strength of global collaboration. It brings together the world's brightest minds, but it also does something else, something absolutely essential. It distributes the enormous financial risk. The journey for a device like this, from concept to patient, not only takes a long time, but can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's this valley of death for innovation where so many good ideas perish. By sharing this financial burden across international partners, research institutions, and governments, we make the moonshot feasible. Our funding to date has been a tapestry woven from various sources. We were propelled by visionary philanthropic support, and we've been backed by state and federal government grants, both here and in America. And here in Australia, we were supported by government-backed funds like the MTP Connect, the MRFF, and quite critically, the Biomedical Translation Fund, which allowed that fund, in cooperation with the Sydney-based venture capital One Ventures, allowed them to come in a little sooner in a project where it hasn't been de-risked as much as they're usually able to come in at an earlier stage. And this global collaborative approach also accelerates clinical trials. Conducting clinical feasibility studies across the US and Australia, as we've done since the first implant described before, July last year, enables faster patient recruitment and provides vital data across diverse populations. It raises the global standard of care. And this brings me home to Australia. One of our proudest milestones happened right here. With the support of our Australian team, as described, a patient received and was supported by the Biomedical Total Heart for more than 105 days before successfully receiving a heart transplant. Remarkably, he was discharged home. I went home with him in the Uber to make sure he was fine. Monitoring his own blood pressure and walking around the streets of Sydney, living his life. We proved it can be done. We proved that Australian innovation can lead the world, but this success raises a question. We have the talent, we have the ideas, we have the drive. The question is, do we have the will to fund it? There's a lot of news right now about the MRFF Medical Research Futures Fund. This is a topic of vital importance to Australians. The fund was created with a base of $20 billion in the revenue meant to support this kind of research. The Biomedical program received support from the MRFF, and it's a prime example of how this fund can be directed to public health needs. The news is good, the returns have been high, and the base fund has been growing significantly beyond its goal, and that's a testament to the fund's design. It's good foresight. A new NHMRC strategy is currently being developed, and as part of that, we have to have a broader conversation about how we fuel that strategy. Despite the fund's growth, the available annual allocation, approximately $650 million, has remained stagnant. While this is happening, our medical research institutions are craving for additional support. Grant success rates are often low. We're witnessing a cultural shift where our best and brightest struggle to get their ideas off the ground. Remember, research is not a cost. It's an investment in our future. And when it comes to medical advancements, like with Biomedical, that future might be decades away. We have an opportunity in the upcoming budget rounds to have a sensible conversation about this, and it's a chance to fully leverage the success of the fund in the way that it was intended. It's not about depleting a national asset, it's about using it wisely and fully to build the next national assets, build the next Biomedical, build the next Cochlear. This conversation offers an opportunity to evaluate and adapt successful global funding models, like the tiered, sustained funding of the US NIH SBIR program, which we benefited from. And this supports projects through multiple high-risk phases, from seeding numerous ideas to supporting those that succeed through phases of regulation and ultimately clinical implementation. It's an opportunity to discuss establishing a dedicated fund to secure our local advanced manufacturing capacity for critical devices, ensuring we have healthcare independence. And it's a chance to mandate that our public innovation budget address areas of high public need, like Class 3 medical devices. So my work is focused on the heart, but the story is true for all high-stakes innovation. The future of medicine will rely on global collaboration, and it will be built by sharing the risk and sharing the knowledge and assembling global dream teams. Our journey with Biomedical proves this. We've had 8 devices running in test tanks for over 3 years now, surpassing FDA's durability requirements. We've seen patients get back out of bed, walk out of the hospital with a new heart and a new future. And so my vision is to bring this technology home and make it available to the Aussie patients who need it. We plan to provide manufacturing opportunities in Australia as a second manufacturing source, to build local capacity, not just for domestic market, but also for the regional area of Asia and beyond, to create a healthcare independence in this region. It all comes back to a simple problem. A plumber, a tradie in Queensland 25 years ago with a failing pump. We're on the cusp of a future where diagnosis of heart failure is no longer a death sentence. A future where the gold standard for treating heart failure may shift from heart transplant to an off-the-shelf durable solution that doesn't have to wait for the unfortunate demise of the donor and the pain of their family. Where a patient doesn't just get more time, but more life with their family. And I know my family often wishes this device could have been miraculously available 20 years ago. We have the ideas and talent in Australia. We have an environment that fosters innovation and out-of-the-box thinking, and along with a culture of tackling difficult problems, not for credit, but for the challenge. And thanks to the prudence of programs like the BTF and the MRFF, and the foresight of other government initiatives, we also have the resources. We just need the courage to connect them further. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Timms. Can I just ask, the MRFF has by all accounts been very beneficial and really a keystone to supporting a lot of innovation in the last, I'm not sure how long it's been around, but a good chunk of the time that you've been developing this product. Has that changed, or it's just slowed? Where are the blockages that you're seeing now, or is it not a blockage per se, but just not keeping pace with the opportunities that the Australian market could meet?
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. The opportunity, there's many ideas that can blossom with more funding. And yeah, certainly some of them may fall away by the wayside if they don't have that opportunity. But certainly the opportunities that are funded are very well supported through that program. And I guess there's just an opportunity to expand that to more ideas and hopefully get them up a little further.
I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the industry development side of things, but you had that very successful inpatient trial earlier this year, which you've sold the patient home in an Uber. Where to next with the trials, and are they likely to be in Australia?
Yeah, so actually funded by the MRFF program, we have the opportunity to do up to 5 implants in Australia. And we're also expanding the trial in the US to another 15 patients there. All this by the middle of next year. All these patients will be able to go home. And it can't be understated the importance then of the MRFF funding to support those clinical trials, because without those clinical trials and without the reimbursement in Australia to support those clinical trials, they may not have happened in Australia. The focus may well have been in the US, where there is reimbursement and opportunity and funding opportunities. So having that foresight from government to say, we want to be part of this. This is an Australian innovation. We want to come along for the road. Then it's very insightful to say, okay, here's some funding that can support this technology.
And you mentioned the opportunities of manufacturing. A lot of discussion about where Australia can build capability, particularly in advanced manufacturing. Since you started and obviously started the company, or part of the company in the US, how has the conversation changed the actual practicalities of manufacturing in Australia? Where are the kind of bright spots that you've seen in recent years?
Yeah, actually one of the things that I've noticed between Australia and the US is that the suppliers or the manufacturers we have here are top class, but there's generally only a couple, whereas in the US there's 10 times that. So the opportunity to be able to choose between different suppliers is critical. And when you're making a device like this, you have to be very selective of the manufacturers that you use, because once they're locked in, it's very hard to change them going forward. But Australia has very good manufacturing. I've seen opportunities that we're going to explore is just in machining of this titanium casing, which is actually quite complex. We can do this in Australia. The electronics that go in the control box that the patient carries around, we can do that in Australia. In fact, we're even using some of the suppliers here in Australia to help essentially design that external control box to make it more patient-friendly. So I've no doubt we can do it all. What I've noticed is going through that opportunity in America, where there's more suppliers that we can try to refine how we're going to make it, and then we bring it back here and we find those suppliers that can do it, and we go.
That's what we want. Okay. We're going to go to the floor now. Our first question is from Julie Hare from the Australian Financial Review.
Hello, and thank you so much for your speech, and congratulations on your award. Well deserved. I came across a quote that says, "Science knows how to get to answers for most of our wicked problems, but without trust, all the science in the world is useless." So my question is this: given the sophistication of so much medical technology and new treatments, and the fact that so many people are dependent on them, including, I imagine, a lot of people in this room, can you reflect on the declining trust in science, scientists, research organisations and universities, not just here but overseas?
It's a great question because, trust is, I guess, born out of the fact that you may not necessarily know what the person is talking about. And so you need to trust what they're doing and that they're going to get a good result at the end of the day. And that's important because, there's a lot of, it's the definition of an innovative research is that not many people know what you're doing next, and that's by definition. So that it needs to be extremely an amount of trust in science, and you need to also be okay with failure at the end of the day because not every idea is going to work out. But you need to try. If you don't try, then you're not going to have any idea that ends up working out. And we experienced this, for at least 10 years, or maybe even longer. Ultimately, I have to say, until really we joined forces with the Texas Art Institute, that no one trusted that this idea was going to work. How could a 23-year-old engineering student in Brisbane with his plumber tradie dad figure out how to make an artificial heart? That's what you have to trust. Are you willing to trust that? We were confused why nobody would trust us on that because it made sense from all of the things that we had researched. It made sense. So it really does come down to, I guess, the credibility. So for that next 10 years, my job was building credibility. And it culminated not only getting credibility for myself as a researcher, but then joining forces, credibility enough to even have them open the door for us in Texas Art Institute, and then ultimately joining forces with us. Once that credibility came, then people started trusting us more.
Okay.
And that's a great idea. Well, it was the same one 10 years ago.
That's a really good answer, but kind of more broadly, Donald Trump, the US president, if you don't know who it is.
I've been over there a few times.
Said in May he was going to reintroduce gold standard science into research.
I know what that means.
And then a couple of months later is basically linking Tylenol or Panadol to autism spectrum disorder. We have seen a decline in trust in universities in Australia as well, and by default in their researchers, even though I think a lot of people in the community don't quite understand the connection between universities and the research that they do. Do you understand where that's coming from, or is it all a bit of a mystery?
Well, I mean, I guess I can just answer that by focusing on what we do in Australia and the rest of the world, not in America right now. Science is based on peer-reviewed work. So if you have an idea, then generally the scientific community and the community in the whole will trust the scientific community to be able to vet out good or bad ideas. And when, I guess, politics starts to get involved in that and push science aside, my feeling is that the majority of Australians can kind of dissect between the rhetoric and actually what real science is. So we will see what happens over there into the future.
Hedging your bets, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-on question?
Sure.
I think we've seen this in the first Trump administration. I think there was a sort of a net brain gain, if you like, of people coming to Australia for exactly the reasons that have been outlined around science and trust and research. Is there an opportunity here to kind of supercharge some of the work being done in Australia by some people wanting to be in a more empirical science environment?
Oh, absolutely. So this is what I experienced in the US. Now I've somewhat been based there for maybe a little over a decade. But a lot of the innovations and drive in the US comes from immigrants, from people who are going there to get the opportunity that is there. And our team was one of them. There's a lot of people looking around for a home in the world that have great ideas and they just want support from the local community to see those ideas through. And that's generally in the past been the US, it's been a melting pot for that. But there's certainly an opportunity now where it's even harder for those people to come into the States. So maybe other countries might be able to pick up the slack.
Hopefully Australia is one of them. Just coming to our next question from Tom Walk from AAP.
Yeah, Tom Walk from AAP. Thanks so much for your address. Just wanted to touch on, you mentioned healthcare independence there at the end of your address, and particularly how that might relate to Australia and our role in the region. And what is the implication if these kind of clinical trials that you are trying to conduct here in Australia, what is the implication for patients and for, I guess, research institutes if they move overseas?
Yeah. It's a good question, because if the focus really does just become in the American market, well, stakeholders would be okay with that because the market's huge. So the detriment would be to the rest of the world access to this kind of technology. And that's what we want to try to avoid. So by trying to build up some kind of infrastructure here in Australia, as I mentioned, it won't only benefit the local community here, but the region throughout Asia. The total artificial heart has never been implanted in Asia, never. They're too big and the focus has just never been there. But that doesn't need to be that way. So having a little bit more opportunity and drive in this region might be able to fix that.
And just on the clinical trials specifically, I guess for me it'd be, someone came up to me and said, I've got this bit of metal that I'm going to stick in you and it'll keep you alive. It'd be pretty daunting. How do you convince people that this is kind of going to work for something that could have such massive consequences?
You take me back to the first patient implant that we did in Texas Heart. And I mean, firstly, most people, it's hard for them to appreciate how heart failure feels. So it generally means you're stuck in bed, and to go to the bathroom, if you can even get out of bed, to get to the bathroom feels like running a marathon. So when you're in that stage, you're looking for options. And if there's no, they might say you can wait for a transplant, but you might be waiting for 6 months, a year or longer, and you may not make it. And your family comes to visit you every day, and you're thinking, hey, wait a second, why don't I roll the dice on this? The first patient, incredibly brave. Imagine that. I mean, yeah, it looks like it come out of a 1974 Datsun. And you're going to put that in my chest? But you'll be surprised how well-read the patients are. So they'll look at what the technologies are available, and especially these days, information's everywhere. And so they see the previous technologies and they say, I don't want that, I want this shiny titanium thing. And going back to that first patient, I remember him saying, after we did the implant, he's like, I said, you're incredibly brave, man. And I said, how did you decide to do that? He goes, well, I was pretty scared, and I just wish I wasn't the first. But as we described to him, and as every patient goes along, they're remarkable. It gets more and more confident for every patient as they've had the good outcomes. And then you'll notice also these patients are like, I just want to save the next patient. We had one patient say, even if it fails, you guys will figure it out. He was an engineer, by the way. He said, you guys will figure it out and you'll fix it and you'll make it better for the next patient. And that's the kind of patients that are enrolling in these trials. And fortunately for them, they then get through to transplanting and can continue with their family.
Thanks so much.
Just a question on clinical trials. I've heard them Australia described as having an opportunity to actually build out its clinical trial opportunity here for other countries to trial. Is that the case? And you mentioned Asia before in terms of what our kind of ethic, profile looks like as a country in terms of making sure that, any sort of medical research or pharmaceuticals actually are fit for purpose for the region. What are the opportunities around clinical trials?
They're immense. I mean, the patients are everywhere that need these kind of technologies. So it's just a matter of being able to bring it through the regulatory pathway to bring it to the patients that need. And, it's important to make sure that there's no shortcuts to get to there.
So that's a double-edged sword. On one hand, the regulatory frameworks create the trust. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there's also
they create the financial burden and time.
So that seems to be difficult conundrum. Any thoughts from your experience on what we might do to address that?
Yeah. I struggle to say that we can take any shortcuts, because something like this, Mother Nature will find you out if you take a shortcut. So the answer really is the funding that's needed to go through that regulatory pathway. We just need to pony up and get it done. And that was our philosophy from the very beginning. usually devices like this will be implanted outside of the US. They'll get scared of the FDA because they're quite strong and difficult to get past. But our philosophy was, no, this is going to keep somebody's life, keep somebody alive. It must work. And FDA have the highest bar for anything like this to get past. So we always had the feeling that once this is implanted in a patient, we're not crossing our fingers at the end of the patient's bed. We're not talking to the family with our fingers crossed behind our back going, well, hope it works. We already know that it works. And this is just now an opportunity for us to show the potential of what we've learned through going through that experience with FDA. So I'm not going to be the person who will ever say reduce the regulatory burden.
I have a question here from Angus Thompson from the Sydney Morning Herald. Australian universities and research bodies often bemoan the fact that there are so many of our brightest minds head overseas to bring their ideas to market. What does Australia need to do to ensure promising researchers can develop technology here, especially with the threat of Donald Trump's drastic tariffs?
It's timing. Honestly, I think it's just the timing of the idea. If looking at our situation as an example, had we managed to get somebody pull their checkbook out and write $2 million on the spot, if that had been government here at that time, then we would have had no necessarily need to go to Texas Heart. It could have been a collaboration rather than a relocation. So it's really down to timing. And it's hard to be able to look through all of the pool because you need the credibility, you need all of that stuff and the trust. But it's really focusing at that particular point because we had no other option. We were out of money. We had a great idea. We're not going to stop. We're never going to stop. But it's just finding that right timing, and it doesn't actually necessarily cost that much.
Okay. Morris Riley for...
I'm asking this question for Simon Gross, Canberra IQ. He apologises for not being here today. I think he's probably turned up to every ASMR address that I can remember, so he does apologise. His question is, you have development partners in Germany and Texas. How would you rate Australian development and commercialisation opportunities in the global context?
Commercialisation is, it's up there in the same tier, but it just doesn't have the same spark and fire that they have in those regions. I wouldn't necessarily say Germany. I think we're not going to Germany for a while. I think that's somewhat a little bit more bureaucratical in Europe, especially in a regulatory pathway. It's getting harder there. But I think Australia punches pretty hard. But what we could probably do is benefit from looking how they do it in the US and taking a leaf out of their book and just taking a little bit more risk.
Okay, great.
Before we have our next question, can I just ask, because you're one of those sort of innovators that's seen before the National Innovation Science Agenda, you mentioned MTP Connect, you've talked about sources of capital, was it One Ventures, I think you said?
One Ventures, yeah.
So all of these things, were designed, I guess, to kind of support and, grow companies exactly like yours. So are there moments in time where you were like, okay, this is great, because there's so many pieces that have to come together in an orchestra. How do those agendas, when we look back, how have they really helped at certain points in time?
Extremely helped a lot. But to use your orchestra example, all the musicians were spread out all over the place and we didn't know where they were. So we were searching around trying to find them, to bring them together. So that's one thing that we could also improve, is just the pathway from an idea through to commercialization, make it a little bit more structured. I mentioned before about the SPR structure. It's amazing. That is just very structured on how to take an idea through to clinic. And if we follow that kind of model, then the funding of bodies that we have available are going to be more effectively and efficiently used. Because otherwise you'll get a funding from there and we'll grab a fund from there. And at the end of that fund, it's like, what's next? Where do we go? Oh, we've got to find another orchestra. We've got to find an oboe player. But having better structure there might be making a little bit more efficient use of the funding. And we're not going up and down like a roller coaster, as we were for quite a lot of the time.
Okay. Ruben.
From one admirer to the other, from Dr. Vanessa Perrotta, leading wildlife scientist. She sent in a question. What advice would you give to Australian scientists who were in your position? how do they keep hope when forced with so many challenges?
Yeah. Just, I mean, in my experiences there, is just have full belief in what you're doing. And, you know, sometimes it may not feel like you're getting good support, and sometimes you may not get any funding. But just remember, you're actually working and researching. It's your investment in yourself. That's all you can do. Like, you may not have funding, but you have time, and you can put that research into yourself. And then that investment's going to pay off later, because in my case, it was credibility. You get more credibility, and then people are going to start to listen to you a little bit more. So the answer really there is just don't give up. And it's not in our nature anyway to give up, so I'm confused why anyone would.
Just while we get our next speaker or question, rather, you mentioned the time when you were working, your dad was in the hospital, you were doing your PhD, you were working, I guess, alongside that process on some of kind of the research, but very closely with some of the clinicians. Was that really unusual at the time?
Unbelievably.
Yeah.
Even now, like, there's no, I don't know anywhere of the places I've been in around the world that there's been an engineering office inside a hospital. 5 minutes walk to the ICU. Like, that just doesn't exist. And that is the foresight of the Prince Charles Hospital at that time. The administration there, you know, we had loose connection with the university and with the idea. And yeah, one of the clinicians there, Keith McNeil, he's just like, we got to bring engineers into our domain. And so giving us that opportunity meant that we could work closer with them, and we didn't have to get in a car and go from the university to the hospital. We were there. Yeah. So that cross-pollination of ideas was essential. So
that was 20 years ago, and that is not kind of structurally applicable today. What would you like to see in terms of making that kind of, you know, engineering and research embedded in? Is it feasible?
It is feasible, but it requires hospital administrators to be a little bit more forward-thinking. And it's not that it hasn't happened. In Melbourne, they're getting closer, not necessarily inside, but close. But, you know, that heyday that we're talking about there 20 years ago, it lasted 5 years. 5 years, Keith left. The next administrator said, Daniel, you're an engineer. It's like a square peg in a round hole. You don't really fit in a hospital.
And yet here you are.
Away we went.
Morris.
So when I go to Amazon and I order one of these things, what am I going to pay?
Interesting question. So have you watched the movie Repo Men?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can actually go on a website to buy them, yeah. They're relatively expensive. And, you know, we haven't necessarily set prices to them now. One of the challenges, of course, is that right now, with the money that we spent to develop, we've got to try to recoup some of that cost early on. So the cost of the device at the beginning is going to be relatively higher. But then as we start to scale up, we can bring those costs down. But importantly, what we've noticed is that almost whatever well, life is priceless ultimately, but everything comes at a cost. And to the hospitals particularly, trying to, you know, meet their bottom line. What they notice is that patients get implanted by this device, if they recover quickly and they move out of the hospital, they free up a hospital bed, and they don't have to stay in the ICU as they're passing away from heart failure. So it's kind of like a juggle between those costs to then set a price for this. But it's, you know, a nice luxury car at the moment.
Okay. Let's just look at the economics. The American medical system's different to the Australian medical system. Medical care in the US is expensive, and most people have insurance. If they don't have insurance, it's a pretty risky proposition to have it. Where here we have a public system, universal health care. What's the economics here? You know, is it all about the hospital? Is it, you know, is it getting people out of hospital earlier? I mean, perhaps you just elaborate about why it'll work in America, and then it's a different medical system here. And, you know, I mean, you know, when we look for new pharmaceuticals here, they've got to go through a very rigorous process, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme and so forth. So I'd be interested in your take on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I go back again to the cost to the hospital to treat a patient. And, In the ICU departments in Australia, it's about $8,000 a day to treat a patient just in the ICU. That's $250,000 a month. That's a lot. Plus it takes up a bed for somebody else. So in Australia, that's the kind of benefit that we get, is to have the patient get better, get out of the hospital, go back to their normal life, maybe even work and pay taxes and all of that stuff, pay their way back. In America, you're right, it's totally different. But somewhat more in our favour in the respect that it costs even more than $8,000 a day for an ICU there. And the insurance companies are very much looking to try to move the patients out of the hospital. And so that's the balance, again, as I described, that we're tapping into. But at the end of the day, you know, with improved manufacturing and bigger scale, then we can bring the costs down, and then it becomes even more palatable.
Yeah. And Corey, just on indulgence, I'm interested in how you patented this and your IP and how you're going to protect that. You know, there's been plenty of copycats in the world. How are you going to protect this investment that you've spent your life on?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you only got to read the Apple story where, you know, phones in China are very, very similar to, you know, the iPhone and so forth. I mean, how are you going to protect that and protect that investment and ultimately get the reward that you deserve?
Right. Yeah, so from the very beginning, we've realised that we're an IP company until we have a device that's, you know, commercially available. And it'll be that way for some time. So we've been pretty, you know, stringent on protecting aspects of the device, both here in Australia, US, and, you know, even internationally, Japan, China. But you're right, there's still copycats around. I guess what we've noticed from the last 20 years of development on this device is that there's a lot of internal knowledge of how to actually run the device. And that knowledge is not easy to translate. And the analogy would be that, which I've used recently, that the world is used to driving cars around to get around, and suddenly we made an airplane. And someone got a hold of the airplane and they got in the cockpit and they're like, how do we fly this thing? And so that'll take a long time to catch up, to figure it out. And our philosophy has always been from the very beginning, why are you copying? Why are you not joining us? Why is it that we need to be in that situation? And for an example, in Asia, there may be opportunities to even then bolster their economy by having them manufacture in those locations. And then it becomes, okay, there'll be a company in that location that is manufacturing and supporting that area. So it's going to be an interesting journey, but yeah, there is a lot of know-how in this to make it run, you can imagine.
Okay, thank you.
Just before our next question, can I ask about return on investment? There have been, you know, state and federal government support. There has been, you know, venture capital support.
Yeah.
There's been, like, we're talking about an incredible innovation in a massive market size. So when we start talking about return on innovation, should people be here keeping an eye out for IPO listings? Should we, you know, what does that pathway look like from here? And, you know, we're talking about money and resources flowing back into Australia by taking bets on, you know, smart innovators like yourself. What does that look like from here?
Sure. Well, firstly, I'm not always comfortable talking about the success and the money aspect of it. But if there is success and money, that means a lot of people are being implanted with the device, which is exactly what we set out to do. But in terms of return on investment, it's a good question, because this is why private money comes in later, right? Because it's not just how much they're getting back, but it's when they're getting it back. And I remember just seeing a slide that Sarah from One Ventures had put up, where it's like a diagonal there from the time and the ROI, and it's like right down the middle there. Well, VCs stay on the top right. Well, government has to help the bottom right to bring it over to that other side. So return on investment in this kind of space, you know, there's a lot of smoke and craters where people have tried to make something and it hasn't succeeded. But when it has succeeded, it's like billion-dollar companies here, because the market really is there for the number of patients that can be supported by that. But it's the time part that is hard for anyone to fathom, and that's why government really just needs to keep these things going until... And
structurally, you're headquartered in Australia, in the US?
Yeah, so our company pathway was to incorporate in Australia originally, in 2008, and in 2013 we shifted to the US, focused there, but we didn't shift completely. We left our company in Australia. And so almost like an anchor back to here. Okay. And now as we run forward, we have a subsidiary in Australia. Our office is in the Gold Coast. We employ a quarter of our company is here in Australia, okay. 15 out of the 60 that we employ. And we treat it as one company. So every 6 months, those 15 come to the US and we work together for a month on that. So I look at, again, this is a global effort. It's just a matter of which side of the fence we're actually, which people are sitting in. But that's the structure that we currently have. And we'll always continue to have. We're not going to cut that tie.
Okay. Next question is Ryan Wynn from Science and Technology Australia.
Hi, thank you. Excuse me. Great ideas fuel economies, but in Australia we're not great at pulling those ideas through. Thank you for your work and speaking about the need to support research as an opportunity, not as a cost. It's amazing to see what you've achieved, especially bringing together a patchwork of domestic and international funding opportunities. It's quite impressive to see. At STA, we have long advocated for a connected R&D system that propels research all the way from ideas through to commercial success. And what you've done is achieve that. We have people in this room from the strategic examination of R&D funding, the National Health and Medical Research Strategy process, and they are currently looking at reams of consultation input they've received in the last few weeks. I guess if you had a magic wand, what would you suggest to them and speak to them in thinking about how do we make a system braver, more ambitious, more sustainable, more predictable?
SBIR, NIH. That structure is, again, really remarkable. It solves what you've just described. It's seed, next round, next round, next round. And investors come along with that. They see the credibility that builds, and they see also that the government's supporting so that their dollar will go further. So that's really the best way, because at the moment, you're right, it's patchwork, and all of those, were they the oboe finalist? Yeah, anyway. So we've got to go and find them, and then find the next one, the next one, the next one, and you've got to go and find it. It's patchwork. But if it's more structured, it becomes more efficient. You don't then have to firstly go and look for it, and then secondly, you have to go and apply for it to a brand new agency that doesn't even know your project. And if you have that structure there, then it takes a lot of that inefficiency away. And instead, we're focusing on doing the innovation and executing on it rather than keeping on going and telling people about it.
Can I just quickly ask, SBIR, can you spell that out for me?
I'm going to miss the I bit, I think. But it's small business innovation research.
Okay.
Yeah.
And question from Dr. Chantal Attard, the ASMR immediate past president.
Thanks so much, Daniel. That was an incredibly inspiring talk. So I guess we've spoken a lot about policy and economics, but I want to bring us back to the patient. So much of my research involves children who are the smallest and the sickest with congenital heart disease. I'm just wondering, how can your tech help these children when their bodies are still so little?
Oh, that's a great question, because yeah, the device is small, much smaller than any other artificial heart, but it won't fit inside a child less than 10 years old, perhaps. And our focus was, let's make it work in adult patients first, and then we'll look at maybe miniaturizing it, making it smaller, something like this. And then we had a conversation with a pediatric surgeon in Texas Children's Hospital. And he's like, hey, Daniel, let's get an SBIR grant to use this device in a pediatric application. We're like, icky, it's too big. And we don't have enough resource to make it smaller right now. We'll do that later. He goes, no, Daniel, you misunderstand. I want this device so that after I transplant a toddler, and their transplant fails, which it inevitably will in their teens, I want this Biomedical to implant in them for the rest of their life. So they don't have to keep getting retransplanted, and they very rarely even ever see 30. So his vision there, which I had never even thought about, was using Biomedical, well, basically as a bridge to Biomedical, in the reverse that anyone had ever thought before. And so that has an amazing impact, as you can imagine. There's obviously less pediatric patients that suffer from heart failure, but there's no better societal benefit than being able to treat that patient population and the patient population that you obviously work with.
Thank you so much for providing so much hope. Thanks.
Before we finish up, I wanted to ask you to ask a question of your 23-year-old self, full of ideas, ambition, motivated to solve problems. If you knew then what you know now, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give that 23-year-old with the drive to solve this problem?
Well, it's probably the advice that everyone gave me along the way, is there's a need for this, just keep going. Even if there's no funding, just keep going. And I'm certainly not going to tell myself how long it took. That's where that naive stubbornness comes from.
Yes, exactly.
And we come that from my dad, I think, too. But yeah, it's certainly that look at what you're doing, and if there's a need, then somebody one day is going to look at what you're doing and they're going to support you.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Daniel Timms for his address.